Hey, good morning, everybody. I bet you didn't expect to see me today, but then I bet you expected to see me last night during Sunday night show. Well, the Lord taketh and the Lord giveth in its own weird way. I was away for most of the weekend, and I didn't really have a chance to plan for last night's show. So that's one of the reasons why I didn't do last night's show. Another reason is I was fried. And it was like, you know what? Even though it's David Bowie's birthday, and I could talk about him ad infinitum, his chart, all kinds of other stuff, and we have a lot of interesting things going on astrologically. I'm like, I'm gonna take the night off. So here I am, an unexpected Astro Weather for Monday. Just a little bonus because you didn't get it last night. You get some today. I hope everybody had a great weekend, that you really enjoy the heck out of that Cancer full moon. I know I did. And I spent it amongst some really good friends and dinner and conversation. And big shout out to Captain Tim and his first mate, Linda, just supplying a great space. I hung out with some fellow Chattarians, and we just had a final time on Saturday. It was really great. And then on Sunday, we had kind of a little get together afterwards. And that would be for the Discord channel. Nothing illicit or anything, right? But just not much I want to talk about here in a lot of ways. So I hope everybody had a great weekend and soaked up a lot of that Cancerian energy. We're on the other side of it now. We've got the Leo full moon. Oh, actually, we're coming off the Cancerian full moon. We're in Leo, and it's a very different energy when you start the week with this full moon. And the aspects of the moon are a little bit tricky. We're going to get into them today. And we're also going to get into a very unusual star that now I contemplated just rolling Bowie over from last night and just talking about him and his chart today. But I decided not to do that. And there's a lot of really interesting people born today. So there were plenty of people to choose from. I almost landed on Rasputin because I had this fascination with Rasputin when I was much younger. I'm like, ooh, this guy is interesting. Definitely appealed to my Scorpio rising. Alas, we're not going to talk about Rasputin. We are going to talk about somebody different, but we'll get there when we get there. Before I do any of that, let's get into the chart for today, which is a very interesting chart. Let me bring it up here. And I'm just going to pull it over to my screen. And yes. Yes, indeed. All right. So where do we have? Let's see. Here we go. All right. I think we're good. Always have to double check a little quality control before we jump into the show, because I do have to punch my Virgo card here. All right. So talking about the aforementioned moon, what was really interesting was before we went into the full moon phase on the weekend, we had the moon essentially in an inconjunct position on the other side in Gemini, right? But here again, we come out of the full moon and we have the moon again in an inconjunct position with the sun, and just kind of out of the inconjunct or the quincunx position with Mercury, which is now behind the sun, by the way. And when that happens, the energy tends to be a bit more experiential. Like there's less filtering of the mental process before we jump into something. And keep in mind, Capricorn is a cardinal sign. So, there are people that are, and that's what's really interesting about having January be the quote unquote first month of the Gregorian year. Like you'll get the cardinal energy at the first, with Aries when we start the first day of the astrological new year, which in many ways makes a lot more sense. But they're both cardinal signs, right? And that cardinal energy really kicks in on the winter solstice. So people want to get things going. They want to get things going. They want to take things out of the mothballs. So there is that energy in the air, period, end of story. Capricorn moves into the second decan. So now it's in the Taurus decan. So whatever you do needs to produce results. When I say results, I'm not talking about like Virgo results. Virgo results are, we're going to check that box, we're going to check that box, we're going to check that box, cross that off our list. Second decan is going to be about monetary results. Like these are things, and have been really for about the last 5 days, where you need to look at, are your efforts being used to either bring in more capital, more resources, and making sure you're getting paid for your time, right? That is a big part of that second decan Capricorn. So if you're born between basically 9 and 19 Capricorn, you're here to make sure that you're getting paid for what you do. The time and the investment and the energy that goes along with this decan needs to manifest in something that's physical, something that bears fruit in a lot of ways, right? So today, I also feel like with Mercury moving behind the sun, again, there's kind of a bit of sense of impatience. We're getting ready to have Mars go direct on Friday. Soon it's going to go stationary. And we'll probably talk about that either tomorrow or on Wednesday when we look at that Mars station. So there's a lot of energy that, again, feels like it's sort of, I wouldn't say backlogged, but it's like, think of a horse that's at the starting gate, right? And the gate hasn't come up yet. And for whatever reason, the horse really wants to get out of the gate and get moving. So there's some of that energy here at the beginning of the year with these two major planets that are retrograde. And even today with the moon in Leo, we know that I wouldn't say Leo is necessarily an emotional sign, although it can be impassioned and can have a great deal of emphasis, right? That's how Leo operates. When you really come from the heart with Leo, you can feel it. There's emphasis, there's impassion. You get great performers and great performances when Leo is really switched on. And here we're having a bit of a difficult day, right? The moon is in a T-square. It's opposing Venus and Aquarius. And it's like, oh, that's all about, well, I want to make sure that everybody else gets something here. I want to make sure everybody else gets their fair share. But over here, the moon in Leo, to put the buzzcocks, what do I get, right? So we have this interesting tug of war emotionally. It's like, damn it, recognize what I do, recognize my contribution, recognize, my blood, sweat, and tears. But over here, it's like, well, why don't you put that aside for a while and think about other people? So this is an interesting dynamic. And can we somehow find a way to get what we need on an emotional level without stomping our feet and, putting our emotional body literally on stage for other people to see? And then we get the inconjunct with the moon and the sun, right? We were over here just prior to the full moon having roughly the same effect. And it's been, Kus here, the Astro Cat has joined me. Well, it's about time. We started, we started 9 minutes ago. You're late. We're late. So, or you're late. I wasn't that late. It was 8:04. But this is different, right? With Gemini, it had to do with the urgency and the insistence for communication. Basically, trying to figure out how you can communicate what you feel, right? With Leo, it's not really about communication. It's about demonstration. So one of the things that I would say as a way to work with the energy is, if you don't get back what you're giving out emotionally, right? Don't get bent out of shape. Try not to get bent out of shape. And also, again, when we deal with the sun here in the Taurus decan, we're counting. We're counting, the material value of our emotional output, right? We're putting a price tag on what we feel, whether we're aware of it or not. Like, that's part of this inconjunct with the moon and the sun. And they're very, very different signs. Capricorn wants to put a lid on it, and Leo wants to take the roof off of it, right? So this is a very interesting day. I think the best remedy here for the moon is the trine with Chiron. And, it may not be what you want today, right? Because people might say, well, this is my contribution. This is what I'm doing. This is, what I'm feeling really passionate about today. When you factor in that trine with Chiron, if you could kind of just shift that a little bit and not necessarily give up your position per se, but try to be a bit more open. Just try to be a bit more open with this trine, because it can be very, very healing. Very, very healing. Back in the 80s, one of the big concepts was this concept of unconditional love, right? Unconditional love. And I was hanging out with this group of people, and it was a kind of a theme. And there was a guy said, right now I'm just trying to get to unconditional like. And the person who was teaching this said, well, you got to get to unconditional love first. But there's something to be said for that, right? Especially with Venus and Aquarius, because Venus and Aquarius is cool and wants to like everybody. Oh, you're cool, you're cool, you're cool, we're cool, right? But over here, this steaming moon in Leo says, well, shit, I'm as cool as you are. It's like, that's how this thing works. If you can just dial that down just a little bit, and stay open, right? You'll get what you want. You'll get what you need over the course of the next 24 hours. And if you could and again, here's one of these cliches, hold the space a little bit with that moon trine Chiron, because what you'll find, I think, in many ways, is that there are going to be mirrors of other people that are going to demonstrate their needs. They're probably very close to your needs too, because we separate that out in the world. We say, well, that's you and not me. Well, a lot of times that's not necessarily the case. It could be a real mirror. What's really interesting is we're beginning this exploration of the dark side of the moon in Leo with Black Moon Lilith. So and it's just moved into Black Moon Lilith just moved into Leo. So we're beginning to explore the negative ramifications of egoic emotions, egoic displays, and also, what do you love, right? What do you love? What do you really love? Because in Black Moon Lilith, it's occulted. And for women, I really feel like Black Moon Lilith, I'm not going to say that it's more important for women than it is for men, but for women, it's really on the surface because they get to deal with how they're perceived by the world, right? Like the scarlet letter. To me, the Black Moon Lilith is the scarlet letter for women. And a lot of it has to do with, to some extent, their unresolved relationships with their mothers. Men have it too, but it's different. Right. It's much, much different. So, if you're a member of the fairer sex and we have Black Moon Lilith and Leo, I think the whole notion of love and the whole notion of fun and play and recreation and joy is going to come up. Right. And if you express those things, how do other people feel about it? Right. How do other people feel? Well, you just do what you want. You're just doing what you want to do, right? Well, that may be something that you have to walk through. And then it's a very interesting time, especially right here at 0 degrees. Like, it is kind of on the button, and it's just right here behind the moon, right? So we're really getting into this place with these semi-challenging aspects with the Leo moon today. And we're going to see Black Moon Lilith, go through all the various degrees of Leo, and right now it's in first decan Leo, so it's fresh. And whether you're a woman or a man, we're all going to be dealing with the shadow side of the egoic nature of emotional expression or non-expression, for that matter. Children play a bit of a role here as well, and if you do have children through this phase with Black Moon Lilith, you're probably going to be looking at your parenting. Somebody may comment about your parenting, that you're not doing it the right way. that you're putting your kids at risk or in danger, right? Because Black Moon Lilith will also evoke fear. It'll also evoke fear, especially in other people, not necessarily in the individual. We've got a moon opposing Saturn as well, right? So there's some hard aspects to the moon today. And I can even feel it, right? This moon square Uranus, like the need to break through, the need to like shatter this sort of permafrost that I think we're starting off with here on Monday, to shatter the permafrost and to break through and get to this other side where we're really much more open and we're connected to the things that we love and we're passionate about the things that we love. With these aspects, again, I'm going to kind of, err on the side of caution, right? Don't try to force your passion or your impassioned emotions on other people. If you can hold that space a little bit with Chiron and trining the moon and taking that into account and again, you're not responsible for other people's feelings, but if you can somehow take that into account, you're going to get what you need over the next 24 hours, but you won't get it directly. You'll get it indirectly. So see where you can help out on an emotional level, right? Take yourself out of the equation for the next 24 hours. Take yourself out of the equation and see where you can. I don't want to use the word be of service. We'll get there when the moon goes into Virgo, but to be artful, to be very artful, and to have some kind of creative approach to feeling. And I also feel like the moon is, even though it's not like Mercury and you're listening, but the moon is receptive. So it's about being receptive to how other people feel. And at the end of the day, Leo is a creative sign. So we're trying to find a creative outlet so that we can be receptive. And I'm not saying to get what we want or need, but if you can do that, you'll get some of that as a result. So we're starting the week off in a bit of a vortex of stuck feeling, frozen feeling. And again, to quote a song, to break, the doors, break on through to the other side. We do have a nice trine with Venus and Mars. I don't want to underestimate that as well, because with Mars retrograde coming in at 8, it's going to stay there at 8. So today we have a nice balance between the masculine and the feminine and the expression of ideas. This could be a very, very good day for the expression of ideas. We still have some water going on with Vesta, Neptune, and even Juno at 28 in Pisces. We have the South Node in Scorpio. But I would say by and large, today is an air fire day, and some interesting angles to Earth and how we can use our resources and come up with some new ideas, especially with the Sun trine Uranus, and again, figuring out, what's my time, what's my value, and what are things worth. I think these are really important notions to understand here. Okay, why don't we get into the star of the day? A bit controversial, perhaps, and there were plenty of people to choose from today. My God, today was a rich day. Let me just go through some of the candidates for today, for the star of the day. Let's see who we have. Oh boy, here let's see who. Let me get into some of these people. I'll save my star of the day for the Jimmy Page. Today is Jimmy Page's birthday, and I thought, well, that would be interesting. I haven't really spent a lot of time with Jimmy Page's chart, but that would certainly be interesting. He's a Capricorn. He's still around, and I think still somewhat relevant. Very interesting character, Jimmy Page. We could do probably the whole show on Jimmy Page. All right, who else do we have? Bob Denver, who played Gilligan from Gilligan's Island. Today is Bob Denver's birthday. Joan Baez, who I never had much fondness for, just in terms of her emotional expression in her singing. Who else do we have? The author Judith Krantz. We talked about the aforementioned Rasputin. And let's see, who else today? The woman with the longest hair in the world at the time, Crystal Gale. We have a chart on her. Where's Leo in her chart? True Note and Leo. Remember that? Remember Crystal Gale and her incredibly long hair? She has a True Note in Leo. Who'd have thought? Of course she does. Let's see. Who else do we have today? We talked about Jimmy Page, Rasputin, Bart Starr, the great Green Bay quarterback, Bart Starr. Wow, that would have been interesting, right? The star of the day is Bart Starr. No, it's not. So today's star of the day is a fairly controversial figure in American politics and one who I think is often misunderstood. And today's star of the day is none other than, let me line it up here. Richard Milhous Nixon. So Nixon is a Capricorn, and his political career really mirrors the evolution of his sign. So Nixon works his way up just like a Capricorn. He winds up becoming vice president for Dwight Eisenhower. So when Eisenhower goes through his second term, Nixon is thought to be the de facto choice of replacement for Dwight Eisenhower. And then he gets into the debates with Kennedy, and you can see that he has a Gemini midheaven. And that would put Kennedy's sun right on his midheaven. So when they debated, Kennedy dominated him. He completely dominated him. So Nixon, I think he was at a disadvantage from a candidate perspective, because when he was debating, all eyes were on Kennedy and not Nixon. Now, Nixon has his son in the fifth house, and Nixon is a big time football fan. He loves football, right? He was the guy that was he started the war on cancer because he went to go see the UT game for the national championship, and Freddie Steinmark wound up being a part of that game and had cancer, right? So he's a big football fan. You can see his son in the fifth house. But he's a guy that's going to endure, right? That's the nature of Capricorn. Now, the other thing with Nixon that I think is interesting is the fact that he has Chiron in the sign of Pisces, which is sacrificial. And Nixon's moon is in Aquarius, right? But his Chiron is in Pisces. And whenever I think of Nixon in terms of a president, and I've talked about this before, and it has to do with the boomers and Pluto and Leo. And in my estimation, right, there is not all boomers, but there was a wave of the boomers who wanted to kill their father. This is Pluto and Leo, right? It's literally killing the sun, S-U-N. And the sun, S-U-N, is the father, right? It's the father, but Capricorn is also the father. Saturn is also the father, right? So Nixon becomes this sacrificial figure in a lot of ways for an entire generation. And it's his Chiron in Pisces, which puts him in sacrificial territory. I wanted to see what was, going on at the time he gave his impeachment speech. And again, it's quite interesting. We see at the top of his chart, there's that South Node in Gemini. And literally Nixon is retreating, right? He's leaving the world right here. He's leaving the world and he's retreating into his fourth house, his place in San Clemente, California, right? So we could just see this from an astrological perspective. But the other thing that we can see here is Mars. And there's a Mars transit in Virgo, and it's in the 12th house, which represents hidden enemies. And Nixon had enemies. And the enemies of Nixon came from a couple different directions, right? The enemies of Nixon came from the counterculture, but there were also enemies with Nixon that had to do with the Democratic Party, because what was going on at Watergate, there was a lot more going on at Watergate than came out during the Watergate trial. And then you had globalists who also wanted Nixon out. So Nixon was a cornered man in a lot of ways. And we can see Mars right here. Now, remember, this is the time of his speech, right? So Mars had been in Virgo for a couple of months at that point in time. So Mars is really showing us that Nixon's dealing with hidden enemies. And, with the Virgo ascendant, Nixon was always going to fall short in a lot of ways. Now, he did have that nice sun trine to his ascendant, but also look at Pluto. Pluto's in Libra. Nixon has the South Node in Libra in his first house. And so what's he going through? Literally, he's going through a death, right? This is it. This is the end of the road for Nixon, not just as a president, but he really did not engage with public life after he stepped down and gave that speech. He never endorsed anybody. He literally just retreated. He's not like Trump. Trump is giving a speech every other week now. He's not like Obama. He's not even like Bill Clinton, because all these guys tend to stay around. They all kind of stayed. Nixon didn't do that. So when this happened, literally, this had a termination, expiration date with him in the first house dealing with the world, right? You can see a lot here. I mean, there's a ton going on in this chart. This is the impeachment chart. And on that day, the moon and Chiron were conjunct in the 8th house in Aries, squaring his sun. We just look at these. I'm sorry, I have a black and white rendition. Here, I'll show you the color rendition. I don't know how that got into black and white. But you can just tell this is one of the most fucking difficult days of Richard Nixon's life. I mean, look at all these squares that are going on, right? Squares, oppositions, just brutal, absolutely brutal chart. The only thing he's got going on, and it's transitory, is the moon in Aquarius, his moon in Aquarius, in trine with transiting Uranus, right? So there's a bit of a energy where he can make kind of a pivot here, but that's really about it, right? Uranus is trining Pluto, so maybe exiting stage left is probably one of the better things he could have done. By the way, I think it's one of the worst things that happened to America, to impeach Nixon, and because it did a number on a lot of people and demoralized them, right? We've had 2 other presidents since Nixon who have been impeached, neither of whom left office. One was Clinton and the other was Trump, at least 3 times. So I think this ultimately was not a good move for the United States. And for what? For having some recordings? Really? Based on what we've seen since then? I mean, come on now. That's like going to prison for stealing a Mounds candy bar from Walgreens. I mean, that's the relative punishment and how punitive this was. And this was intentional, right? This was very, very intentional. And you could just see that this was really the end of the road for Nixon on this day, August 8th, 1974, the day he gave us. I even recorded it. I recorded it on a tape recorder as a kid. I watched it at home. I don't think this is a great period for the United States. End of story. But like I said, they wanted to sacrifice him, right? They needed a sacrifice. The boomer generation, needed that Jim Morrison moment, where he sings about the end and he says, Father, goes into the whole Oedipal thing. I want to kill you. right? Father, I want to kill you. This was the mantra in a lot of ways of the 60s and leading into the 70s. So Nixon becomes sacrificial, Chiron in Pisces. And true note in Aries. So one of the things he's noted for, of course, is the Vietnam War and the ramping up of the Vietnam War, even after Johnson left and Kissinger replaced Kennedy's great men. A very interesting chart. Pluto in his 10th house, which speaks to the staying power of Nixon, but also with Pluto there, that he would go through some kind of a death. And if we backed off that true node, right? That true node would eventually, or south node rather, that south node would eventually, of course, hit his midheaven here, right? It would totally hit his midheaven. But during the whole Watergate proceedings and leading up to it, that south node was on his Pluto, right? Absolutely on his Pluto. And again, when you get into things like Watergate and recordings and spying, those are all very Gemini attributes. So we can even see the progression here, up with him professionally in the world. A very interesting chart, a tortured day, and a president who I believe was a byproduct of what we would call the deep state, but more than the deep state, he was literally a sacrificial figure for an entire generation. And even with the goat, right? Capricorn, the goat that gets slaughtered, the goat that gets sacrificed in a lot of ways for, eating purposes, whatever, right? It's right in there with the sacrificial lamb and the sacrificial ram. All right. This has been your Astro Weather for today. Thanks for being here. Thanks for hanging out. I'll see you guys tomorrow at 8 o'clock Central Standard Time. And then we'll ramp up